Thank you. Good morning. Welcome to this Joint Audit and Standards Committee. I'm Councillor John Matheson. I'm chairing the meeting today. May I first of all remind you of some domestic arrangements. Please ensure microphones are turned off when not in use, that you do not interrupt other speakers, that if you are attending the meeting to speak and persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. Please ensure your mobile phones are on silent or switched off. Additionally, we will be using e-voting for this meeting on the modern.gov app. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this meeting as a speaker, you are also consenting to being recorded by the Council and to possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. Council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. If you're intending to do so, please could you inform the committee clerk. The officers in attendance today are Tom Barker, Chief Operating Officer, Alistair Greer, Senior Business Partner for Capital and Treasury, Joe Hobbs, Head of Strategic Policy, Teresa Fairburn, Risk Management Lead, John Snell, Head of Internal Audit, Alicia Norman, the Deputy Monitoring Officer, Bethany Webb, Governance Support Officer, and Melissa Evans, Director of Finance and Procurement, and Sarah Wilcock, Director of Corporate Services. Welcome to you all. Can I move to the agenda, please? Right. Do we have some apologies for absence, please?
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillor Simon Dowling and Councillor Isabel Rees.
Right, but no substitutions. Right, no. Thank you. Right, are there any declarations of pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests from members? No, there are not. Right, so let's like to move to JAC 2423, the minutes of our previous meeting on the 6th of December. Are there any points regarding the accuracy of the minutes? No. Could I have a proposer? Would you like to propose it? Right. Yes. Councillor Harron. Can we have a seconder, please? Councillor Whitehead, thank you. We'll now have an electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now in progress. Thank you, Chair. That's 7 votes for and 1 abstention. That's carried.
Thank you very much. Right, do we have any petitions?
None received, Chair.
Right, do we have any questions from the public?
None received, Chair.
Do we have any questions from councillors?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Right, we now move to JAC 2424, the Joint Capital Investment and Treasury Management Strategies for the coming year 25-26. I'd like to invite the Director of Finance and Procurement to introduce the report to the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. So this report presents the Joint Capital Investment and Treasury Management Strategies for 25-26. It's the annual report in accordance with regulations and best practice. It's being presented to the committee today and will be presented to full council meetings of each council at the end of this month. If I just take you through the sections in the report. So at Appendix A, you'll find the joint capital strategy for 25-26. Appendix B is the joint investment strategy 2025-26. Appendix C is the joint treasury management strategy 25-26. At Appendix D, you can find the treasury management indicators. Appendix E, we've got the economic outlook and interest rate forecast provided by Arlene Close. Appendix F is the Treasury Management Policy Statement, and then finally Appendix G is the Minimum Revenue Provision Policy Statement. If I just run through the recommendations and just point out which ones are a change to the normal recommendations that you've had in the past. So the first recommendation is approval of the joint capital strategy, as I mentioned at Appendix A. The change to this is that we're proposing to reduce the limit of capitalisation of assets from 10,000 down to 1,000. The purpose of this reduction is to allow more expenditure to be capitalised, and that will enable the burden on council's revenues budgets to be reduced. So that's the first one. The second one is approval of the joint investment strategy for service and commercial investments at Appendix B. So that's the normal approval that you'd have every year. Third one is to support the development of an environmental, social and governance ESG strategy for financing capital projects and works in conjunction with the strategic asset management strategy and the treasury management strategy as discussed in Appendix C. The next piece of work to be done is to identify a set of ESG-related investment priorities in terms of economic activity to be actively supported and then an economic activity to be avoided. So those are the two key things we'll be focusing on in that strategy. The next recommendation is approval of the joint treasury management strategy in Appendix C. That's a normal approval, but there's some sub-elements to that which we are changing. So we're proposing to increase the investment limit from 2 million to 5 million with any one counterparty. So this brings the councils in line with other similar sized authorities which also apply a 5 million limit. We're proposing to remove the upper limit of £2 million on the operational bank account, and this would reduce the unnecessary layer of administration from the finance team. And then finally, not to allow any lending to other local authorities during 2025-26, and this is to avoid exposure to the potential risk of investment losses from lending to other local authorities in the event that local authorities default on that investment. The next recommendation is approval of the joint treasury management indicators, and that's the normal one as set out in Appendix D. Appendix F is approval of the joint treasury management policy statement. Appendix G, approval of the minimum revenue provision policy statement. And then finally, Appendix E, noting the key factors and information relating to and affecting the treasury management activities. So that's all I was going to say by way of introduction, and I have Alistair here, and we're both happy to take any questions.
Any questions that the members may have on this paper? Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just trying to find the section. It's one of the easy ones. It's on page 11, I believe, 1.4 or 1.5, around the capital expenditure and financing, the shift from and the reduction from 10,000 down to 1,000. Just wanted to ask about the cumulative effect. So, for example, if you were going to purchase 50 iPads, what's the policy now for that? Has that changed?
Question, no, that hasn't changed. We do tend to amalgamate those kind of purchases and capitalise them anyway. So I think the impact will be fairly minimal anyway, because we do look to amalgamate those sorts of things. So.
Right. Any further questions? Councillor McCarron, please.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to the not lending to other local authorities, and I understand the explanation for that, but was it beneficial to us to actually provide that facility?
I think in reality, probably no. With the rates that they are at the moment, we can quite easily put them in money market funds or DMADF anyway. And I think as the councils require more borrowing, I think the circumstances where we're going to have surplus cash are probably reducing anyway. So there probably wasn't that much benefit in terms of interest rate we would have received.
Any further questions, Councillor Whitehead, please?
Thank you, Chair. My understanding historically was that there has been some lending between Mid Suffolk and Baber, and presumably under this rule we couldn't do that anymore. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Thank you. Another question, Councillor Whitehead?
Question on Appendix C, Table 2, page 29. Find it myself. Sorry, let me just find that. It's to do with the headroom. The table shows general fund headroom. I'm looking at the one for Mid Suffolk. It seems to go down. Where is it here? It seems to go down to 181,000 from 17 million. Over that period of 5 years, and I just wonder what the implications were as that heads towards zero. I'm thinking, you know, in the news we've seen recently about, for example, the Chancellor having issues with borrowing headroom. And I just wondered if any implications here with that.
I think all it demonstrates is that we're actually we're catching up with our capital programme spend and matching that with our borrowing. I think the one to look at is probably the authorised limit and the operational limit, because that's where we build in. So the tables on, I'm just trying to find the right tables. On page 32, that's probably the one where we'd look to see are we getting close to that limit. So at the moment I'm still quite comfortable with where we are. So I think the first table is just showing that actually we are catching up with our capital spend, and we're planning to spend against that. So it's more the authorised limit and the operational boundary that I would focus on. If we get close to that, that's when we need to worry. So.
Any further questions? None at all? Very well, I better make sure I haven't got any. I don't think so. Right, well, we'd now like to have a brief debate on this paper. Anybody like to start? Any points to make? Very quiet. Councillor Register.
It's merely the comment that given what might happen to Baber District and Mid Suffolk councils, I think predictions of 28, 29 are possibly a bit moot anyway, really. But actually, what would happen to all the investment? Would it go to whatever unitaries that exist? Would they have to take on our debts and our investment?
Well, I think that our Chief Operating Officer has got some general observations that he's able to make about the how we should, in general terms, be going through these difficulties.
If it's helpful, yes. As part of the process and details are emerging, so we're not entirely clear on what will end up or where it will go, but ultimately Baber District Council and Mid Suffolk District Council currently serve their residents through the democratic process, and any successor authority will be democratically elected and will serve its residents, and therefore it is mature and responsible for the councils to look to hand on authorities that are in their best possible state to those future successor authorities who will be accountable to the residents within those areas. So assets and liabilities will pass on to a successor authority, and in the same way, so debts and assets will will be passed to a future authority. There is no sense at present that the government are seeking to or show any enthusiasm for clearing any debts prior to any transfer across to new authorities.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, my feeling really is that fortunately various other groups of councils have been through these turbulent times, let's say, and so the general guidelines are there as to how these things ought to be done, and no doubt it will be painful and difficult and argued about, but there it is.
Thank you, Chair. Sort of on that line, so we've got sort of the plan about new investments that we're purchasing and the development. And what about the assets that we currently own? That obviously, you know, whichever authority takes over, wherever that transition, that would happen. But there has been some discussion around assets that the districts own that could potentially be gifted or go into other hands. You know, is there any assets or anything in the mind of the district where they could be given to other charitable organisations or anything like this so that they remain within the community? There has been some conversation about that I've heard in the public sort of domain. So I don't know if there's been any thoughts about that. It's basically securing assets. It's making sure that they remain within communities, that they remain sort of part of potential projects that are ongoing, that sort of thing. Any discussion about that?
So this relates to my previous answer, I guess, that any successor authority will equally have a responsibility towards those residents and local areas. Of course, there is a mechanism for asset transfer that exists at the moment. Councils need to achieve best value and all those type of things, but asset transfer can and does happen, and I would anticipate that continuing while we achieve clarity and certainty about what's going to happen in the future.
So there are no restrictions at this point through this transition period that we cannot do any transfers or anything like that?
So I'm seeking legal advice on what the likely milestones may or may not be. So as we go through the process of unitarisation, or whatever phrase we might use, there will be various stages, and as you get closer to the creation of a new unitary and that becoming active, then there are more constraints that are likely to be placed upon the councils. Exactly what those milestones are and where they exist, I'm just seeking legal advice on that at the moment.
Is there anything we can learn from what, as I said a moment ago, that past, you know, process in past years in other places about asset, let's say, transfer other than within the authorities that are coming together in terms of, you know, divesting them? Is that your phrase about best value? So that
yes, so there is a mechanism as things stand for the council to transfer its assets to communities, and that's happened. You'll have seen that with various bits of open space where that might have happened, or particular buildings where that might have happened. So there is a lawful process for the councils to go through whereby it can divest, for want of a better word, it can divest its assets to local communities. And clearly your officers will be exploring all of what's happened in the past in terms of other unitaries that have been created. We won't be the first to go through these things, so there's a lot of learning that we can do to look around. But I would return to the point that there is currently a democratically elected body that provides services to residents. In the future, there will be a democratically elected body that will provide services to its residents. So those things will continue. There will continue to be democratic accountability over the way that a future council provides services to residents.
Right, thank you. Are there further debating points that people wish to contribute? I think I've got a question which I'll need to just find. I think it's essentially in the yes, regarding recommendation 3.3, the ESG strategy, etc., etc. There was a suggestion in this chamber, in a county council meeting, that we had recently bought additional shares in an oil fossil fuel company, and I was very surprised at that at the time, and I think that officers have looked most closely subsequently at our dealings, particularly in the scope of pooled funds, our pooled fund investments. So officers just like to set the record straight about that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I can confirm we have made no new investments directly in Shell. I can clearly state that actually the investment we have, and the one that does have about 2.9% linked to Shell, is the Schroeder Income Maximiser Fund, and that was entered into in 2015, so it predates any decision that was made by this administration or either of the administrations currently in place. And actually 2.9% of that fund is only about £50,000, so that's the only one that may have any links to Shell, but we have made no new investments, so it was incorrect statement.
Thank you for making that very clear. Right, if there are no... yes, there is, Councillor Rowe. A point.
Kind of a bit carrying on from that point, I'd find it useful in future to, like, as well as the kind of credit ratings of banks and building societies, if there'd be a way to include some sort of rating of the kind of social and ethical standards of banks and building societies, because I know, for example, building societies, by kind of inherently how they're made up, don't have the same investments as banks, and there's some which lend to like involving in arms and stuff, but from just looking at the kind of Moody ratings and that information, you don't get that information from the list of places that we can lend to invest.
Thank you. That it leads nicely on to the point that I did want to just suggest. Paragraph 4.6 is a page 36 of the supplementary papers. Tells us that a report will be brought to the Joint Cabinet with options for the future of our strategic pooled funds. So I think that's useful to see that's coming forward. And the other point is just on the counterparty detail. We have previously had on the list and then taken off the list the Co-op Bank, and I do know, and I declare an interest as a customer of the Co-op Bank, that they are now in the ownership of Coventry Building Society, a mutual, in fact, and so I wonder whether we should be adding them back into our acceptable counterparties if their credit rating is adequate.
I'll certainly have that conversation with Arlen Close, because they advise us as to which are the safest counterparties to and banks to invest in. So I'll have that conversation with Arlen Close and see where they stand on that one.
Right. Thank you very much. So if our council register's got a point, the debate's getting going now.
Sorry, I've just been reminded of a question. Are we planning any extra protections to avoid the UBS pooled fund losses that we've suffered when they pulled that fund, pulled that pooled fund, so to avoid it happening in the future? So I mean, I don't know how quickly that could have been signposted ahead of it happening, but yeah, I don't know. Is there anything we could learn from that?
Officers
We
may
do.
help
Do
with
we
that
say-
one.
Yeah, I think that was a really unusual circumstance. It's never something that I've experienced in the 25 plus years of working in local government. The fund was underinvested, and that was the reason it closed. They didn't have enough investors in there. I think it's fair to say the other funds we've got are much larger and on a much larger scale, so I think it's unlikely that the same thing will happen. But just to reassure members, as part of the 25-26 budget papers that will be coming to council, we are proposing to set aside an earmarked reserve of £1 million to set aside any, if that happens again. So we will have the reserve set aside should that be the case, but I think it's unlikely.
Yeah, I think it's true to say that that essential degree of losses amongst the various pooled funds has been sitting with us for quite a number of years, actually, and it's not even arisen recently, particularly, has it? But anyway, we are on the statutory override has meant that we haven't needed to declare those losses over, year to year as they were occurring. But as officers now have said, we are going to fully provide for the current levels of losses, and so if the statutory override finally gets withdrawn, which is continually threatened and never takes place, then we will have dealt with it. So I think that comes back to us handing it over in a timely way and in good shape as per previously. Thank you. No, Councillor Whitehead, yes. I think it's a very important paper. I certainly don't want to truncate the debate early.
I was going to say, don't we need someone to move the recommendation anyway, because the report was presented by officers. So I'm happy to move the recommendations and certainly welcome the removal of the upper limit on the banks and the increase in counterparties.
Good. Right, are we all...
We still need a seconder. We still need a seconder.
Proposer and a seconder. Good. Got them to... Yes, okay, can we have the vote now then, please? Yes, I'll just get back to my script.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now in progress. Thank you, Chair. That's 8 votes for. That's unanimous.
Thank you very much. Right, we now move to JAC 24/25, Risk Management. And I'd like to invite the Head of Strategic Policy to introduce the report to the committee.
Lovely. Thank you, Chair. The report before members today is our annual review of our risk management strategy and policy, and it's our review on the effectiveness of the risk management arrangements that we have in the councils, which we do on an annual basis to this committee. So this review provides an update on the progress and recommendations from our external auditors TIA, recommendations from our Local Government Association Corporate Peer Challenge from 2022, and bringing together the principles for risk management that we follow, set out in the government's Orange Book, and continuous improvement that's being undertaken by officers. So this report brings into one place all the recommendations we have and the progress we're making on those recommendations. So the revised risk management strategy and policy is shown in the papers with track changes, and these show the revisions that we are wanting to make to the policy to our existing adopted strategy. These include the procedure for when a risk can be closed down, the Council's risk appetite statement, the revised scoring and guidance assurance criteria for financial impact of risks, and some minor factual clarifications and updates on team names and post holders, etc. So there is still an ongoing programme of work to deliver these recommendations in full, ensuring that strategic risks are clearly linked to the Council's strategic priorities, and ensuring evidence of risk management is present in all risks. Also making sure that the ongoing programme of financial transformation is set out and clearly monitored, and also ongoing improvement work led by the risk management lead, Teresa Fairbairn. So all of this work we report into joint cabinet on a quarterly basis to show the progress and make sure that cabinet leads are happy with the progress we're making on all of these recommendations. So members today are asked to support the revised risk management strategy and policy, which will then go on to be formally agreed by both cabinets following discussion at this meeting. If there's any points of clarification that we can answer, then we're here to answer those questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members got any questions for officers on this one? Councillor McLaren.
Thank you. As risk management, as we know, is everybody's business, which part of this, the council, I'm talking about, you know, the actual working council, which sort of is the most susceptible to risk, do you think? Thank you.
Thank you. So I think the answers shown in our risk registers, I think it's rather than most susceptible to risk, it's more so what are our highest risks, and that's shown in our scoring. So where we have kind of the highest likelihood of risk happening and then having the biggest impact. So we routinely track the risks that are scoring the highest. So we use a 4x4 risk scoring. So if it's the highest risk versus the highest impact and it's scoring a 4x4, we make sure we keep an eye on those. So our burning red hot risks, finance do appear in quite a few of our risks, as they do with the majority of local government organisations at present. But we keep a track, we keep an eye on those. And the beauty of our software management system that we use at the moment, Pentana, is we can report by exception. So rather than having to trawl through all the information, our system produces reports that show what are the most burning red hot risks, and we actively manage those through our risk review with our leadership teams, and through the operational risk owners as well.
Thank you. Councillor, oops, a bit more. Yes?
Can I follow it?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Is there an opportunity for some of us to see reports of, you know, where risks have been identified and managed? Because it's got to be happening. It's an organic organisation, isn't it? It's on the move all the time. Is it possible for the committee to see examples of where it's been managed well?
Yes, so all members do have access to our risk registers on our SharePoint site, and so all members are able to see that active risk management happening. Also we'd recommend if there are any particular concerns to liaise with our risk manager, Teresa here. But no, members do have access to kind of that assurance that we are managing all of those risks, and in those risk registers you'll be able to see which risks are kind of the burning red hot risks, and then the mitigation that's being put in place to manage those.
Thank you. Next question. All quiet. Right, we'll move to one or two of my questions then. I think on Councillor McLaren's point, I think it would be great if we could remind all members of both councils of the availability and where they go if they want to look at the risk registers in general. I think we ought to do that at least once or twice a year, frankly. There are lots and lots of risks, and I think anxiety that I have is about the extent of member engagement in in looking at the risk. What I wanted to ask then particularly was, can you just outline a little bit more? I think that the individual cabinet members are the primary owners of the risks, and so how frequently and how much time do each of those, I think each individual portfolio holder has a meeting with the relevant manager of that risk, and with the risk officers. How frequently and how much time is spent, and you know, are you comfortable with how thoroughly all the cabinet members are you know, engaging with their risks?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And yes, that's certainly something that we've been supporting the Cabinet members on. So we have a quarterly review that goes into a joint Cabinet briefing of all of our strategic risks, where we have an opportunity to show progress on how risk management is going, and also having a horizon scan to see if there are any issues coming up. But predominantly, those discussions of risks emerging do happen within the portfolio holder briefings that each kind of director has with their Cabinet member leads, where they obviously discuss risks, how they're going to be able to escalate those and manage them. But then we make sure in that quarterly review that goes into joint Cabinet briefing that we have clear visibility of it, because obviously we need to make sure that we've got evidence and assurance that we are actively managing those risks, and that is what is provided in those reports into the joint Cabinet briefing, where we produce reports from our system Pentana. So the discussions over the past 12 months have evolved very well. We have very detailed discussions in those joint Cabinet briefings now on, like say, emerging risks, things that are coming up on the horizon, and then we can take those away and make sure they're being adequately mitigated within the different service areas.
Right, thank you. Yes, so you're comfortable with the level of engagement. That's good. Yeah, a much more minor point, really. 312.2, transitioning to a finance business partnering model, etc., etc. It's on page 11 there. Yeah, I didn't quite understand what that actually was telling me. If you'd like to elaborate or explain it in simple terms.
Yeah, so we have introduced a business partner model for the team. I've now got the head of finance, David Fevier-Ward, is now working through the restructure of the team and looking at processes, roles and responsibilities to make sure we've got the right people doing the right jobs, and also that we've got some succession planning in the team as well. So that's basically what that's referring to there.
Underway, basically. Yeah, it's unfortunate that that officer's not able to be here today. Thank you. I think that's the limit of my questions. If anybody else has got a question, please speak now. Councillor Baker.
Thank you. There was a couple of questions that I had, if I may. Firstly, obviously great report, loads of detailed information. You know, you've got all your the whole policy and everything that's kind of outlined there, and there's a lot of information. In relation to the structure of the team and the district council, and how all the roles and how it all kind of fits together, and the roles and responsibilities, and it's like, is there a flow chart anywhere about in relation to the risk, obviously the risk team, and how all the other teams filter in, and how they take their risk aspects and how that filters up? Because personally, I'd find that really helpful to see a visual on that structure and how that risk is transferred up. So that was that question. And the other one was around equality and inclusion screening. Obviously had the screening there. On each of the risk registers, do you know if there's a line, I don't know if I've seen one, which actually says there's an EIA risk element? You know, has every risk register been checked for equality and inclusion? You know, does any of this risk impact a particular group? And are we regularly making sure it's a tick box, if you like, on all of those registers? Does that make sense? Thank you.
Sorry, thank you. So in response to the first question, so the roles and responsibilities that we kind of ask of the organisation of who kind of should be doing what is set out within the risk management strategy and policy in section 10. It's not as visual as a flow chart. It's more so it's a table that kind of talks through all the different kind of roles to make sure that they pick up, and in some ways it's a bit of a web as well of kind of interconnecting, so it might be difficult to show in one kind of flow chart, but that aims to bring kind of that whole point of responsibility, that it isn't just the cabinet members who are responsible for risk, it's for any officer making a decision and kind of contributing to a decision, as well as councillors making those decisions. So we bring it alive within there, but also within our SharePoint site that members have access to, and that we will make sure is circulated to members on a regular basis, as the Chair's request earlier. We have the 3 lines of defence model, which also talks about the responsibilities around risks, to make sure you have the 3 lines of defence so that you don't kind of stumble if one kind of line of defence is lost. Is there anything else you want to come in on that point, Teresa?
I don't think so.
No, okay, so hopefully that gives some assurance that we do it, but often with kind of where it's a kind of behavioural response to something, it's the quality of the connections and the conversations that we have around what we are asking people to do. So there is an ongoing programme of kind of training, kind of engagement. Teresa is always kind of meeting the teams, and it's that kind of interaction which then helps people kind of develop into the kind of the roles and responsibilities that we set out in that document. So it's a bit of a blend of both, really, a structure and that kind of personal connection that we make as well. So then the question around equality impact kind of our work. Risk management doesn't necessarily go through kind of the screening process that we have when we make decisions, but the work that we do within risk management, so the mitigation that we identify, so if we take a particular course of action, any decision is then screened through our process of a quality impact assessment. So it's kind of addressed in that manner rather than the risk itself, because the risk management is more so the approaches we take to make decisions, but then when we take the decisions, that's when we have the kind of equality impact kind of assessment screening and then full consideration, because at that point that's when we can really make sure that any decisions, there is the appropriate thought process that goes in, any suitable mitigations put in place. So it's more so done at that point rather than kind of against each risk register. And at least the recommendations from the government's Orange Book that we follow doesn't necessarily kind of ask us to do it at that stage, because obviously it is followed by other procedures. It's caught at our other stages.
I mean, I don't know if it's possible, but I would find a visual representation of all of those. Or I know it's there, we've sort of seen it. There's a lot of information, if you like, there, and it's also embedded. And obviously, you've got your 3 lines of defence and everything. For accounts and things, I don't know how everybody else feels, but I would love to see a visual representation so you can clearly see that kind of move up and those 3 lines of defence, like we see with the councils and all of the other committees. And the EIA stuff, I would just like to make sure that it is always picked up, you know, in every aspect. So,
Thank you.
Yes, yeah, no, thank you. We will take away the request for more visual representation. We'll work on that and we'll see what we can do, and we'll bring it back, no doubt, to this committee when we report next year back in. And certainly, yeah, we note your comments on the assurance that we should be ensuring any decisions we take have due consideration against anyone with protected characteristics.
Thank you. Did I see Councillor McLaren wavering for a question there?
I'll have another question. Thank you, Chair. Given the way we operate, or the council operates with working from home, and not everybody is in at the same time, has that impacted, do you think, on how we manage risks? In my experience, often where something, it was a fraudulent problem, it was actually a temporary clerk that identified where the gap was in the system, and it's that support, isn't it, that members of staff need on a day-to-day basis. So has this working from home impacted at all in our management of risks? Thank you.
Interesting question.
Yes, so obviously working from home has been more predominant since 2020. A lot of the structures that we're working to now were put in place after 2020, and one of the key things about getting visibility of how we are doing risk management came with our performance management software, Pentana, and that was implemented kind of post-2020. So it's difficult to kind of make that judgment, but I think we have quite a few visible checks and measures in place now, and that kind of central reporting that give us more assurance that nothing is kind of falling, you know, kind of through the cracks and kind of being missed. So I think I can only provide that assurance to the committee that we do have much better visibility with the obviously investment in that software and the ability of that to report into the leadership team and joint cabinet briefings.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Marriott.
I was just wondering, for a staff member reporting a risk, are they supposed to report it to their manager first, or can they just report it off their own bat?
So it does depend on the nature of the risk. So I mean, if there's an immediate issue, then obviously a conversation with the manager, and the manager will identify appropriate ways to deal with that risk. If it's more of a risk that has been highlighted that then needs a kind of a programme of work associated to it, then obviously that's a discussion. The risk manager will consider whether, so the operational manager will consider whether to put a risk on their risk register. So it does depend on the issue, I think, is the answer. And obviously, as the immediate issue, then a series of actions may need to be taken, but ultimately it's for that risk register owner, so often the head of service, to consider, you know, is this risk on my risk register? Do I need to amend? Do I need to change? Do I need to do some further mitigation and put a new programme of work in place to deal with this issue? So it's an ongoing process, but it does depend on the matter in hand as to kind of the actions that you immediately take.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Then we just pointing out we're asked to note the progress in improving our risk management, and that we are that we support the revised, lightly revised, I think we're saying, aren't we, risk management strategy. And that we note the appended joint appetite statement. We haven't really any questions about that one yet, have we? But anyway, I just wanted to point out what we are being asked to do, and finally to note the revised scoring of financial impact of risks. So, does anybody like to debate those recommendations, please? Nobody would. No? Well, as I said, they are largely matters of. We are approving policy, so it's important that we do. If there's anything, no, we're all right. Can I have a proposer for the recommendations? Anybody like to do that? Thank you, Councillor McLaren. Seconded, Councillor Register. Okay. Right, so we can therefore move to a vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now in progress. Thank you, Chair. That's 8 votes for. That's carried.
Right, that takes us to that point. Right, our next topic is JAC 24/26, the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000, and our use of the legislation and an updated policy on that. And I'd like to invite the Head of Internal Audit to introduce the report to the committee.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, what is RIPA? The Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000 is designed to ensure that public bodies respect the privacy of members of the public when carrying out investigations, and that privacy is only interfered with when the law permits and there is a clear public interest justification to do so. This policy and guidance is intended as a practical reference guide for council officers and investigators who may be involved in covert operations. Officers involved in covert operations must familiarise themselves with these arrangements. RIPA and the Code of Practice, which supports the Act, require councillors to have a regular oversight of activities authorised under RIPA. Code of Practice also requires councillors to regularly review the council's RIPA guidance, and this is in the form of the policy which you have as Appendix A. The overwhelming majority of surveillance undertaken by councils, not just by us but councils up and down the land, can be done overtly, meaning there will be nothing secretive or hidden about the way it's conducted. In many cases, officers will be going about council business openly. For example, open routine inspections by environmental health officers, just to give you an example. And I can give you some more examples of where it can be used as well. These will be subject to investigations, but if there is any inquiries, then we would have to go through the surveillance, for example, and that would be done so through a court of law. It's normally the Crown prosecution that would actually do that, Crown courts, and you'd have to go through and provide an evidence-based why you believe that surveillance in this particular instance would be more preferable than working overtly. Members should note that councils have not used surveillance powers or assessed communications for over 5 years, certainly in my history of having an oversight of this. So if we move on to the inspection regime, each council is inspected by the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office, the IPCO, every 3 years regarding its compliance with the Act and the Investigation Powers Act 2016. Baber and Mid Suffolk were recently inspected in June last year, and previous inspection June 2021. Following a review of how IPCO conducts its oversight of local authorities, they now require councils to respond to a number of designated questions, which is effectively a written statement to provide assurance on its compliance with the legislation. From the responses that the IPCO assess, whether a remote or in some cases in-person inspection is required. This revised approach is in recognition of the general decline in use of covert powers by many local authorities. As the councils have not used the powers since the last inspection, and our responses to the dedicated questions that the IPCO have confirmed that they are satisfied that our reply provides assurance of ongoing compliance with RIPA 2000 and the Investigatory Powers Act 2016 will be maintained. As such, the IPCO have confirmed that Baber and Mid Suffolk will not require a further inspection this year. Based on the responses provided by myself, the IPCO have asked that we carry out the following. 1, ensure that the compliance issues continue to receive the necessary internal governance and oversight through the Senior Responsible Officer. 2, the policy is refreshed. Annual updates to your local elected members, it will come through to this committee. And 3, ongoing training and awareness. And that's something I'm currently looking at. In the past, we've had a supplier come in and provide training. But what I'm currently looking at is some e-learning module training, which officers will undertake. And I'm possibly thinking of extending it to members as well, so they have that level of assurance and understanding in terms of background. So happy to take any questions that you may have at this stage. Thank you.
Right, do we have questions on that paper, please? Right, Councillor Baker.
Thank you. This is quite new to me, so I'm just trying to get to grips with this. This report very much talks about this covert sort of the surveillance that district would put in a scenario. Is the surveillance that members of the public would bring to district that would be utilised in any way? And is that part of something else, or is this part of this?
I think that's normally part of something else. How the members of the public could get involved in the sense that if they've got concerns, and using for an example any antisocial behaviour, for example, where there's suggestions of alcohol abuse, drug abuse, etc., or harassment on tenants, they would obviously report that through, hopefully through the housing department. If we felt that there was sufficient evidence, we could go through the surveillance, or normally what would happen in this instance, we would work again overtly. So we would probably speak to the individuals concerned to say that perhaps a complaint has been forwarded to us, and give them the opportunity then to hopefully give their side of things, and if there is any justification, to change their attitudes. So that's where the member of the public and us as councillors would come into effect.
Thank you. Is that all? Yes, Councillor McLaren?
Thank you, Chair. On page 57, 1.6, there is a statement that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee has a strategic oversight role in or around the Council's RIPA process. Is that new, or, because I don't remember being involved with that.
Sorry, Councillor, you say page 57?
Page 57, it says the Overview and Scrutiny Committee has a strategic oversight role in or of the Council's RIPA process, which came as a surprise to me, but I'm asking whether it's new or whether...
No, I think that's probably maybe an oversight on our part, because it's actually what this report and policy would actually come here rather than Overview and Scrutiny. Okay. However, as Overview and Scrutiny, you may want to have a look, but what I'm suggesting here, we've not used any surveillance, so you're not really looking at anything where if we had, you might want to test the process that we've adhered to, but that would again go through the court of law as well in terms of getting that authorisation. So it's something that we would perhaps that committee would be mindful of, but as we haven't had any requests for authorisations, it's probably on the back burner.
That was Councillor Register next, please.
Oddly, I had to do this in the 1980s whilst working for a cell phone company. So my question's quite simple. RIPA didn't exist then, but we had to follow PACE rules. Does this mean every officer has to follow the Police and Criminal Evidence Act rules?
That's actually slightly different if you're investigating and you would caution that individual, in which case we would then bring the police involved, or we would actually, because we don't have any qualified officers within Baker and Suffolk, but however we would use Ipswich, who have 14, Suffolk County Council have 14, but also Tier as well do have officers that are PACE trained, but that would only take place if we were actually investigating an individual.
Yes.
It's we didn't do any of, or what we were doing was collecting data on mobile phones and passing it to police authorities, but we had to ensure that we didn't breach any of the rules of PACE at the time. It's just whether there is consideration of PACE rules when collecting data, evidence.
Yes, certainly I think there would be, but also within this Act now, there's also a large section around social media. So we as officers, if we are looking at perhaps social platforms on an individual or a business, there comes a point in time where you would need to record it. So you can't go on a fishing expedition, you would have to actually focus on that individual business because you have concerns, and where you would do, you would collect data, but you do need to record it, because if you then go to the courts to have a surveillance injunction, then effectively you would have to demonstrate to the courts that there's justification of proportionality to that individual.
Thank you. Yeah, Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Chair. The Shared Revenues Partnership handles revenue collection and benefit payments on behalf of the council. Now, their employees are all employed by Ipswich Borough Council, but if they use this power to investigate someone in either Mid-Suffolk or Baber, would it be reported under Ipswich or under us?
So if that were the case, because they're the host authority, they would obviously notify us, and I would be able to sanction or not whether that investigation takes place. But then again, Ipswich would have to then demonstrate what evidence they've got, and we as an authority would make that decision whether we want to pursue that. Also, in terms of what you're saying, Councillor, Ipswich obviously follow the same policy. So this is a policy in terms of all authorities adapt to, and they're inspected as well. So they would have the same criteria that they would need to meet as well as we would do. But there's every chance, if that were the case, then Ipswich would investigate on our behalf.
My question was, would then that be reported under them or under us? You know,
Okay, so if we had to go into a court to get that surveillance authorisation, that would come through us because we would have to sign it off. In terms of providing the evidence, that would come from Ipswich.
All right, any further questions? I think at this point, what I wanted to ask, if you can really confirm, is that since as you said, more than 5 years ago, when we were making effective use of the Act, but the emphasis seems to have shifted to and including the training of officers and even members, is essentially to ensure that we don't stray into that territory which would require authorisation. And I think the definitions section that we just almost looked at, but looked at the word before it, you know, that's actually quite helpful. But is that really why we're not using or not needing to report any use of the Act?
So, as I said sort of into my introduction, a lot of authorities up and down the land don't tend to do covert operations because it's a very complicated piece of legislation. If you get it wrong, there's reputational damage to the council, because the argument will be you're impinging on someone's civil liberties, the human rights side. So you have to be extremely careful in terms of following this policy, and hence why over the past authorities have come unstuck where they've taken an individual or business to court and they've not found in favour of the council because they haven't either dotted an I or crossed a T. So the first port of call is to do things overtly and try and resolve the situation there. And it's only then would you then consider covert operations.
Right. Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. Right, if there are no further questions, then if we could have any debate, and the recommendations that we're debating here are that we approve the refreshed policy and the various changes to which officers are responsible under the Act, and just to note that there have not been any uses of the Act during the year 23-24, and presumably up to date, actually, I suppose. Yes, up to now. So, is anybody like to debate those recommendations? Councillor McLaren would.
Well, it's more a recommendation, probably. I think that members, being in the rest of the council, need to be advised of this, really. I think a lot of members would be quite ignorant about these powers, but I think it's worth a member briefing on this.
Yes, thank you. That's a good point. This isn't something that needs to go past full council as a matter of constitutional propriety and whatnot. But on the other hand, if perhaps a committee officer could make a note that we will refer to this debate and this agenda item when we report the work of the committee today. So we can do that. Councillor Rowe.
Yeah. I'd like to update recommendation 1 of saying how it would be put into practice is fine, but update it so it fits in with the language we use. So, for example, there's some kind of gendered language. So on page 77, it says, like, no officer may seek the acquisition of any form of communication data unless he is authorised, which is not but not how
No,
we
that's
use
not-
language. So there's a few different bits where kind of there's like he used, and when they would be perfectly good and reflect how we've done things elsewhere in the council.
Thank you. Yeah, can we make any necessary adjustments to this before we kind of presumably have to republish it on our website somewhere?
Yes, certainly, Councillor. Yeah, I'll go through that again and obviously make it gender neutral, if that makes sense.
Worked our way through the Constitution and no doubt some of the policies, but yeah, the wrong words sometimes.
Yeah, a lot of this is actually almost taken from the government's website as well, so it sort of steps up. But I take your point, and I'll go through that again and make necessary changes.
Thank you. Any other debating points that anybody wants to make? No? Right, well, I'll propose this one. And someone like to second it? Councillor Rowe would like to second it. And we will move on to the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now in progress.
Oh, I've got to sign on again now. Oh dear. Oh dear.
Do you want to take yours verbally?
No, I'll get there, don't worry. It's the usual cap lock problem. So get it all on there. Yep.
Thank you, Chair. That's 8 votes for. That's unanimous.
Thank you very much. Right, that's that one. That is that one done. Right, what have we got left to do? That. Right, well, I think we'll take a 5-minute comfort break and resume at 10 minutes to 12. Okay. Right, welcome back to the remainder of the Audit and Standards Committee meeting. And our next item is the government's consultation on strengthening the standards and conduct framework for local authorities in England, which is actually JAC 24/27. I'd like to invite the Chief Operating Officer to introduce the report to the committee.
Thank you, Councillor. So on the 18th of December 2024, the government launched a consultation paper to gather feedback on proposed methods of strengthening the standards and conduct regime across England. A range of proposals have been identified, and responses to the consultation are invited from both local authority elected councillors and officers from all types and tiers of local authorities in England. Consultation closes on the 26th of February. The report provides a draft proposed response at Appendix A. I won't go through the key information because you've all had the report. The headline changes really revolve around providing a mandatory minimum prescribed code, information related to standards committees, publication of investigation outcomes, stronger sanctions, and the introduction of a national body to process appeals. There are some 40 questions within the consultation, so I wouldn't suggest that you necessarily want to run through all of them, but there may be some points that you want to clarify, some particular questions. I would, I suppose, point your attention towards questions 18 to 34, which relate specifically to the strengthening of sanctions, the introduction of potential to suspension, and then some details associated with that. You may not want to go through all of those in detail, but that's where the real nub of the changes proposed sit. And then in terms of other questions, question 8 refers to the role of independent persons. Question 11, whereby your officers consider that only cases in which a member is found guilty of wrongdoing should be published. You may have some queries or wish to look at that. And question 12 is one where your officers perceive that if a councillor stands down, then investigations should cease, essentially for a number of reasons, but that would safeguard your officer resource as one of those reasons, but again, you may feel differently. And then just as a point of clarification, questions 14, 15 and 16 are not shown within your within the appendix. They are all questions that are specific to the individuals completing the consultation response, and they relate to their own personal experiences of the Code of Conduct. So for officers, have you felt constrained and unable to put forward a complaint under the Code of Conduct, and what has got in the way of you doing that? For councillors, have you experienced a Code of Conduct complaint against that type of thing? So so they would be things that any individual councillors or officers may wish to respond on, but they wouldn't be appropriate for the council-wide response. So they won't form part of the response to myself. That was all I was going to do by way of introduction. Hand back over to you, Councillor.
Right, so questions on that. Councillor Marriott first.
Okay, regards the actual consultation questions. Just one or two points on the questions. Question 9, it refers to the committee being chaired by the independent person. Is there a description of who the independent person is for people completing it? I mean, you do give a definition further, further on, but if I would want to know who the independent person was. Question 18. Authorities should be the sort of highlighted answer that authorities should be given the power to suspend members. Would that be after the members have been able to lodge an appeal, or would that not feature?
If you'd like to run through all your questions, I'll try and capture them all, and then I'll try and answer them all.
I think, and the last one was question 21. If somebody responded yes to the second option, the government should set a different maximum length in months. So, according to what people responded on that, if how would you actually decide what response level was appropriate.
Right. Other questions, members? Anybody else? Councillor Rowe has a question.
I could have one.
Right, Councillor Rowe, then Councillor Hurren.
I can't find quite where it is, but there's a bit about when there's an investigation going on, and what are our policies for officers when there's an investigation, like about being able to access site and stuff, because I'm kind of thinking if there is like a very serious allegation that requires an investigation, then is there a reason we wouldn't be applying sanctions at the investigation stage? Yeah, and do we have that as well for officers, or do we, if there's a serious enough allegation of a certain level of merit, would we then put in stuff at investigation stage?
I'm really sorry, Councillor Rowe, but could you just reframe that for me a little bit? I'm not sure exactly what the question was. I'm really sorry.
I think there's a bit about like facility bans and stuff, but it's only when there's so like for question 26 and 27, there's like the highlighted answer is no members whose investigations are ongoing should retain access to council premises and facilities. But if there's a really serious allegation, that kind of process of investigation needs to be followed. But say there was an incident that was seen, like say there was an incident of assault seen, for example, then it would be investigated, but that might be a bit where we'd want to put in measures while the investigation was going on, rather than waiting for the end of the investigation. Do you see what I mean?
Councillor Baker, question? No, I think you wanted to try and collect a bundle of these together.
I had originally intended that to just be one councillor at a time rather than all.
Oh, right. Okay, sorry. Do continue to answer that one.
Sorry, if I refer to Councillor Marriott's questions. So the independent persons, the council has independent persons who it refers complaints to, and so those questions relate to whether those independent persons would become members of the Standards Committee, and if they were members of the Standards Committee, should they be the chair of that Standards Committee?
Okay.
So that's the point on independent persons, and that's what those questions there relate to. On the power to suspend, there are questions inherent within it that flow from if you perceive that the council should have the power to suspend those who breach the code, then there are subsequent questions that refer to the ability to appeal that, and that's what the draft responses say essentially. So what we're saying is if that we do, your officers have put forward that we do support the Standards Authority having increased powers, i.e. the power to suspend, and if it does so, then it is right and proper that there is a right to appeal that. You clearly couldn't appeal before a judgment had been made type thing, because you would have nothing to appeal against. So the body would have to make its decision. You would have to then be suspended. You could then appeal against that to a national body. And again, as you flow through questions 18 through to 34, it kind of follows in a fairly logical manner that one flows from the next. 21 was, sorry. So again, that's a question. So your officers have said that we think 6 months is appropriate, but clearly that's for you as a committee to give a steer on if you perceive that actually 6 months is not long enough, it needs to be longer, or if you think that 6 months is too long and therefore it needs to be shorter. So they are the questions that are kind of up for debate and for which I'm listening to get a steer in terms of putting forward the council's response. And then I'll just go to question 26, which was around suspensions. So is that in terms of suspending councillors pending the outcome of investigation? And your officers have said that we don't think that that is necessary. I'm just reminding myself as I go through in terms of all of the system's going slow. Hold on, just bear with me a sec. So your officers have said that we don't perceive that interim suspensions would be necessary, that the investigation can take part and then a suspension should happen after that. If you've got thoughts as a committee amongst that, then again that's something for you to debate as part of this item, and again I'll take a sense and a steer from you in terms of providing the response.
Can I come back on that?
Thank you. Yeah, Councillor Rowe again. Can you turn the microphone off?
I forgot to leave that. And yeah, there was a bit of my question of what is the process for officers? Because I know it's how councils work. We're inherently in a bit of a weird situation. That's why there's this consultation, because kind of what is applied to officers isn't applied to councillors, but it's all one workplace. Do we expect officers to be able to be banned from facilities pending the outcome of investigation, or would it still add in a kind of a one rule for councillors, one rule for officers?
There is, so if it helps, there are slightly different approaches in terms of officers and councillors. Officers are employees of the council, councillors are councillors. And so there are different routes and approaches. The code of conduct in this context applies to elected councillors, not to officers. And so it's a separate mechanism that deals with officer behaviour, essentially.
Yeah, I'd actually like to come in next. I'll tell you why. My reading of the point about independent members is different. I thought that was referring to the one or two independent members of this council, which we are currently seeking to recruit, rather than that, particularly when it comes to the point of should they be chairing, etc., that the chairing of this committee by that independent person that we are currently trying to recruit is a separate issue, but it seems to be quite clearly overlapping, and the operating officer's answer related particularly to the independent persons that we have appointed to review and decide whether there is a legitimate issue of the code of conduct being breached or not on the sort of prima facie first look, which is the different persons.
If I can clarify, this is referring to the independent persons that support the code of conduct process. It doesn't refer to those independent persons that may or may not be co-opted onto this committee.
Right. Okay. So, what's been suggested in the question is that that we would be convening a subcommittee or whatever with that independent person brought into it, or possibly to chair it as part of the panel, so to speak, which heard the case. Is that what we're saying there?
So if I can clarify, when a code of conduct complaint is submitted, that is kind of triaged and looked at. It is then investigated. The outcome of that investigation is then sent to an independent person to seek their view and steer on that, and some degree of independence. and that their view would then be reported into a standards board. What this is asking about and suggesting is that rather than that independent person simply making their view known and that being reported to councillors, that they become part of a future standards committee. That's the question. Should they be on that standards committee? And if they are, should they chair it? So
Yes.
those are those questions. So they refer to the independent persons that support the code of conduct process. Again, entirely separate from the non-councillors that you have been seeking to co-opt onto this committee.
Right. I think it's very helpful that we actually get that very clearly stated. Thank you for that. And I think Councillor Baker was next, and then Councillor Marriott again.
Thank you, Chair. I'm referring to question 12. So I was an investigating officer for Suffolk County for other staff and external organisations, that sort of thing, for quite a while. And generally, it is quite common for people to stand down from positions. So on question 12, it said, should investigations into the conduct of members who stand down before a decision continue to their conclusion and the findings be published? I'm actually, well, you know, you can't help this because it's obviously in one question, but there's a no there. And the trouble is these things always come around again. You know, they come back and they bite you in the bum. So if people move positions, people go to another council, people will move around. And I do feel that if something has been logged, it does need to be seen through to the end. So I was wondering really, sort of, I've got an idea why it's a no, but I was just wondering if you know what the thinking was behind a no for question 12.
That's in part to protect your officer resource, kind of a sense that once somebody's stepped down, then they've stepped down, and the outcome of that would therefore not, there would be no sanction that you could apply because they would no longer be a councillor. So that's the nub of it. But again, this is where, if you want to ask me questions to kind of clarify and understand the thinking, and then in terms of your debate, I'll then be able to pick up where the committee is in the round. I suppose you won't necessarily achieve consensus on every single question, but be able to pick that up in the round.
Thank you. Right. Yes, Councillor Marriott.
Oh, it was just to sort of go back on the independent person. It was just to say that you had given a definition of the independent person on page 1142. But when I made the point, I was just sort of saying, for somebody actually completing this survey, would they actually know who the independent person was? Do you need to have a short definition of that somewhere in the survey?
My instinct is that most people who are likely to complete the survey will be councillors, for example, and therefore would know. And the survey is not one that's being framed by the district council. So in terms of our ability to put placeholders or add further information or anything of that, it's a government consultation. So anybody completing this will need to go on to the government website and complete the consultation. And therefore, the information that supports that is that which is available on the government website, rather than something that we can necessarily put forward to people, because they won't come to us in order for us to provide their consultation response for them. They will be doing it directly on the government's website.
Okay.
Right. Councillor McLaren. Councillor sorry.
Thank you.
Apologies. Yeah, we'll come
sorry,
to Councillor
was Councillor Herron before me?
Councillor, carry on.
All right.
I'll go last, I don't mind.
No. Councillor McLaren.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the recommendations on this paper, it's encouraging members, presumably of this committee, to participate. But has anything gone out across to all members, or how do we go about participating in this consultation? Or have I missed it?
I need to double check if something has gone out to all members in working together or in the councillor update or anything of that nature. So I just need to double check. But I'm not averse. I'm not averse to having.
I've not seen anything, Tom.
Okay.
Thank you.
You've had something.
So We're
So
double
it
checking
appears
that,
there's
yeah?
it appears there's a little bit of ambiguity as to whether something has gone to all councillors already or not, because I've got some divergent views about whether something has or hasn't been received. So I'll double check that, and I'm not averse to sending something out to all councillors. If the wish of this committee, for example, is that this consultation is promoted to all councillors, then absolutely I could take a steer from that and send something round.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. I feel as if we have, but there's a fortnight to go to the deadline, and so there's every opportunity to remind everybody again, if for the first or second time. Councillor Hurren.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, it's probably mainly an observation, really, as well as a question, but this is a consultation to strengthen standards and put punishments in if they're not met. But there's no mention in this paper about training, either before people become councillors or afterwards, or if they go wrong. I feel training should be available, and I wonder if that thread could be worked into our answer. I'll certainly put it into my personal one. And you know, I've had instances where parish councillors, you see they're gone astray and doing things that aren't quite right. And it would be nice as if I could recommend sort of training. Maybe it should be statutory if they start to go wrong. They should be made to take training, especially on financial matters, I think, whatever level we are. So that's a thread that I think should be the heart of all this, and it's hardly mentioned, if at all. Thank you, Chairman. That's just my main point. You can avert so much trouble if we're on top of it earlier.
Any comment on that?
I'm happy to try and find a question where I can kind of weave that into the response. Yes.
You'll have difficulty.
Sorry?
You'll have difficulty. It's hardly mentioned. It's, you know, it's very lacking, to be honest.
There'll be somewhere that I can add that as a bit of free text where it feels at least
I'm already working on it.
relevant.
I mean, it's very frequently part of our sanction that we apply, isn't it?
Yes, it's probably, I don't want to overstate, it's certainly one of the most common sanctions that would be applied, yes.
Thank you. Yeah, Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Chair. My query relates to the response to question 1, because we're being asked to endorse the consultation completed by the officer. I mean, when I've been involved with some finance consultations back to government in the past, we've always responded on behalf of the council rather than, you know, an individual. It seems to me that if this is completed and seen as being a council or two councils' responses, then with no disrespect to the officer, it should have more clout than just an individual officer.
Absolutely. These were drafted as we were thinking of it being an officer decision that would go in under delegation, which I have a delegation to provide government consultations. There was then a request for it to come here and for it to be discussed here. So when responding, then it will be a response that goes in under C, district or borough council.
So basically, the recommendation says to endorse, but that recommendation needs to change, and I think, because we're not endorsing we're adopting it and giving it as ours.
So it would, you could adopt the you could amend the recommendation to endorse the response subject to minor changes as discussed during the committee, or some wording of that nature.
Yeah, I think as I'm the guilty party in asking that this was brought to the committee, perhaps I should say that yes, the intention obviously was that we might, if we wanted to make amendments, and I think that Tom has actually made that clear in his introduction, that you know, we're open to that, or he is open to that. In submitting his response, and just to repeat again that everybody who's got divergent views about any of these questions is very welcome to submit their own response as well. And you've got just
I'm still not
final
sure.
point on that?
Yeah, I'm still not sure what point's being taken, because if the government received this at the moment, it's just going to say, oh, this is a response by a council officer.
Yeah,
Rather than this is a response from Mid Suffolk District Council and Baby District Council.
yeah, I don't know, is that the fault of the government in setting out the...
Councillor Whitehead, I may not have been... So what I'd intended to say was that for question 1, then the answer will be C rather than B. So it will go from an individual officer on behalf of the council body. Yes, so I would... sorry, that's where I want it to be. Wasn't as clear as I should have been. It won't go in as B, it will go in as C. The second bullet down. Because it won't go in on behalf of the town council, because we're a district council.
No, where am I? Thank you. Yeah, right, Councillor Rowe.
Okay, as following on from that conversation, this wasn't what originally I was going to ask, but are we going to send in 2 as we're 2 councils? So, because the way it's worded says a council, but by the sound of it, that's kind of what you do for the 2 councils. But I've got a couple of questions. One about question 11, which is about publishing kind of the outcomes, and kind of it, because it's talking about required to publish, so I can understand why kind of where there's been allegations without merit, then they might not need to be published. But when figuring out the answer to that, were you thinking, because we discussed this at Staymarket Town Council, and there was a discussion around only publishing the things where there's been wrongdoing because of how public could perceive stuff, but then there was a kind of move to we would need to sometimes publish stuff where there's been people have been declared innocent, basically found innocent, because then the kind of rumours that would help clear up rumours and provide protection. So yeah, when you answered that, were you also thinking of if you publish investigations where it's been found there's no wrongdoing, then that also helps councillors? And my other question also was on question 40 with the equality stuff, because of rules about harassment and stuff. It seems like this would have a benefit, it would link in with the Equality Act, because if people were doing stuff which was against the Equality Act, and kind of as an organisation we needed to put in ways to protect people with protected characteristics, this would give us a way of doing it which we might not have had before. So did that come into the conversation?
So I think this was essentially officers saying that we shouldn't be publishing allegations where there hasn't been an outcome of those allegations. So what I'll do is, which isn't an option. So essentially, option 1, yes, you publish everything, including all allegations which may be, may be a result of harassment or other things like that. So we thought, well, that wouldn't be a good idea. So we went for no. Thinking it through and listening to the points that you made, I think it would be worthwhile me creating some text that can go in the free text box, because there is a third option with the free text box to say that it should be published where there is an outcome of an investigation, because then you're publishing whether somebody has been found to breach or somebody has been found not to breach, which feels like a more fair and transparent approach, rather than simply publishing those where there has been wrongdoing.
Yeah, I'd just like to perhaps add to that yeah, other views fill in the text box, but individually. But our comms department distinguish between proactive and reactive statements that they put out, and it seems to me that if an allegation has already been extensively aired in the local media, be it the newspapers or social media or whatever, or radio, then reactively we might want through the comms department to put out the fact that this case has been investigated and it was found there was not a breach of the code of conduct, but we wouldn't proactively be putting out those statements unless they were already been brought into the public domain. That seems to me sort of, that helps, you know, that's perhaps part of the other views part of that. I think you might like to ask Brad Jones about that, but that's how I would kind of read that one, as you know, addressing the problem and the fact that there was not a finding of breach.
So I'm happy to try and find a form of words for that. My anxiety, I suppose, is where you draw the line in terms of there having been some kind of allegations that have been public. Well, if they've been at a parish council meeting and people have heard them who were at that meeting, would you then publish something in the press to say that this person has been found not guilty? Where would you draw the line? So if it's just verbally in a meeting, or it's gone up on a parish notice board, or if it's on social media, or if it's a statement that a parish have made themselves, or if it's in the press itself. It seemed to me that there's a variety of different ways in which the allegations that you describe could be made public, and where along that spectrum would then require you to proactively publish the outcome as a press release. So
Well,
there's just some things to
I
think
can see the difficulty, and I think that would become a matter for the council comms department, decision really as to whether it had been publicised to the point where it needed a response. Let's put it that way. I think Councillor Harron's got a point to make on this.
But just solely and simply that I think everyone is innocent until proved guilty. We could end up, stoking the fire, couldn't we? Which is not right. If it's all over everywhere and it involves us, the district council, we can issue a holding response, but mainly stay out, I would suggest.
Yeah, certainly reactive, not proactive, is my starting point on that, really. There's a council register. Still trying to do questions here. It's all strange.
Yeah, I'm thinking the way round this is you ask the respondent. If the respondent, I mean, given the wide range of code of conduct complaints there could be, and that some of them would be just listing the complaint could cause reputational damage or whatever. Wondering if it's just worth asking the respondent if they either request it or agree to have it publicised, because it would then exonerate them. And because sometimes, I mean, if you leave it hanging because they were found not guilty, then yes, the stuff will be still in the media and it won't be counted. Whereas if they want it to be, or if it's in their interest to publish it, then I would guess do it.
So I'm sort of thinking as I'm responding.
We're definitely debating here at this.
My instinct would be that it would be for the individual to protect their good name, so to speak, rather than the councils per se. So the councils would provide a response to that person in terms of the outcome of any investigation, and they would then. I'm conscious that you've got many hundreds of parish councillors and parish councils and all the rest of it. And again, I think it's very much down to the individual. For some, they may perceive that, if there's been a lag of 3 months while an investigation has been undertaken, then publishing that afresh, even if it shows a degree of innocence, brings the whole issue back to the surface and all that kind of thing. So I think I'd be very wary of, conscious this is about us providing a consultation response to government that they may or may not ignore in its entirety, or listen to completely type thing, rather than this consultation response is not us establishing our process and procedures. That's kind of the next item almost. So it's something that we need to think about.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I think I can see Councillor Baker's got a finger in the air.
Thank you. Just on that point, sort of obviously press, you know, they come to councillors, they come to the district council to say, can you please, you know, comment on this? And that would be the opportunity to say, you know, theoretically, this is, you know, no, they've been found not guilty, for example. But I'm just wondering about sort of the guidance for councillors, because, you know, councillors, should we even be commenting on that? That should, the official response should be coming from district, and do you see what I mean? So all of that publishing, it's about our role as well as councillors, because media will speak to people, they'll ask that sort of thing, and, you know, it's really wondering about the framework for district and how that is all managed, because it's all very sensitive, and as you say, you know, does it get published, and who is responsible for giving that answer? Should it be other councillors that even, you know, comment on that? Should the answer always be coming from the district? Does that make sense?
The answers should be coming from the district, not from individual councillors.
Right, thank you. Are we all done for questions? Right, the debate, I guess, wants to be framed in terms of people wanting to dispute the recommended answers that have been provided. So we try and sort of take them in order. That might help a bit. And if two people who want to talk about question number 94 or whatever it is, can they urgently waive their then we'll try and take, you know, we'll completely deal with one question at a time if we can. So would anybody like to start on that process of debating?
Chairman, I'd quite like to propose an amendment.
Right, Councillor Harron. An amendment to what? To the recommended changes. Recommended.
Well, to the response. Really. I find this just a tick box exercise. Really. They're looking for an opinion, and it. Yeah, I think without the training reference, both as a guide to start with and as a punishment if you go wrong, to keep on being whatever councillor you are, this is pretty meaningless, really. So I would propose that we add the training option, well, into the whole paper, not just individual questions. They're all found wanting, really. That would be my theme and my wish as a long-standing councillor. And I started as a parish councillor about 40 years ago, so I've experience of both. I think one thing that set this in my mind, one of my councils went quite astray a couple of years ago, and I recommended that they took training from your predecessor, Tom, and she gave it, and she offered the option of some training or else. One left, but one is still there, and he hasn't improved, or they haven't improved one jot, and it's still causing a problem. It runs on, you see. I think training should be used, look, 3 strikes and you're out, take the training, or you can't carry on, basically, as an option of a way out for them and a response from us. All these options are a bit meaningless, I feel, as they stand, but we can't deal with each question individually. It needs to be an overall response, I feel, and we'll have to leave it maybe in your hands, and then we see your response before it's sent back. I know we've only got a couple of weeks, but it's quite important, actually.
If it helps to clarify, the consultation is seeking views on changes that it is proposing. Now, the sanction of training, for example, is not proposed to be being changed.
I'm aware of that. That's why I'm concerned.
But what I was hearing from you, I think, is your sense that training is a really important sanction that is available to the monitoring officer. It will continue to remain an option for the monitoring officer. This is not proposing to make any change in regard to what that sanction or other sanctions might be. This is solely seeking views on some peripheral matters, but essentially on whether suspension should be reintroduced as a sanction. That's the real nub of what this consultation is seeking views on, and then what flows from the implication of the power to suspend.
But before suspension, I think it would make good practice and sense to offer the issue of training rather than just chuck them out if it's a minor matter.
Absolutely, and the sanction is framed as being a very last resort type thing, and I would anticipate you wouldn't even necessarily be suspending, a councillor. You wouldn't anticipate to do that every year or every couple of years. It may be that it's a sanction that is very, very rarely used indeed.
If I could just, in terms of either the consultation or our process, if the decision is training, which, as I said, it frequently is, what is the sanction if they don't do the training? Can that then be brought forward to the point where, under what they're envisaging, that person would then be suspended? I think that sort of addresses part of what Councillor Harron's asking.
I think arguably, yes, potentially, but it's not yet as precise in terms of exactly what breaches of the code would justify suspension. But certainly the language they're using is the most kind of heinous of breaches. So it would be for a standards committee to look at the particular details on any particular case, and my guess is that a standards committee that had met and imposed a sanction for training and then had been ignored, and then had met again and said, well, you're supposed to do training, and then been ignored again, may at some point then look to escalate what those sanctions are. So the sanction for not attending training, for example, could be the removal from a relevant committee as part of the council. And so you would have I would anticipate a kind of stepped process whereby if somebody didn't undertake the training that they'd been requested to go on, you've then got another step and then another step, and you would probably go through several steps before you got to the stage of suspending somebody. That's my reading of it.
If suspension was reintroduced,
if suspension was
as
reintroduced,
the government are proposing, yes.
The government are suggesting as an option.
I thought they were proposing.
I think it's very much that
not proposing.
They're not suggesting that councillors should suddenly be suspended all over the country for all manner of different activities. They're saying as a last resort, as the kind of last power available to you, would it be a good idea, would you like it in your toolbox, monitoring officers, to be able to suspend people?
Thank you. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. I have three requests, I suppose, sort of suggestions. One is an amendment to this, if possible. So you're talking about training in relation to a sanction. I would like to request that a package of training is available to councillors as they come into post around code of conduct in detail and what that could look like, but also professional ethics, because quite often you sit and you see some behaviours come out and actually you're trying to get to the root cause. So I would quite like that to happen before rather than any sanctions. And I know there is training and that sort of thing, but sort of a suggestion. The other thing is around support for councillors, so it's not part of this paper, but could we look at some point the support that is available from the council for councillors when they are going through this process? Because obviously it's very much, if something's happened, people are pushed out of the door, it's quite frightening, it's quite upsetting for people, they're on their own, and I think, guilty or not guilty, they are very isolated, and I do feel there needs to be some sort of support package for councillors, because largely it's a voluntary thing that everybody does, And I wondered if that could be considered as sort of a well-being approach. But as far as this paper goes, I would like to ask an amendment on the response to question 12, because I do think that if there is a behaviour that people are demonstrating, it will come back again. And if they stand down, that is a common process. They will stand down and they will re-enter another council. You know, they could go from district to East Suffolk to Ipswich Borough to whoever. When we're unitary, it doesn't really matter. But, you know, they will just keep pinging along. Processes, I firmly believe, need to be seen to the end.
Yes, that's quite a significant
So
point.
for my own benefit, it would be useful on that particular point to get some sense as to the degree to which the rest of the committee shares that view about question 12. It's not a problem to change it at all. It can just go from a no to a yes. Yeah. Is that a relatively unanimous or consensus around that change?
Anyone else like to speak about question 12 in particular? Yes, Councillor Marriott would.
I was just going to say, I think it would depend on the degree of seriousness of the conduct. I mean, someone could stand down and just over a relatively minor matter, and I don't know if in that case whether that should be published.
More views on question 12, Councillor Rowe.
I've got a few other questions, but I can come back to them, or views on other questions. But for question 12, I agree with it a lot, because that's pretty much why we have the DBS system, because people move around and it was identified as an issue, and like has been said, people can step down from position, not just council but various positions. And as this is focused on like level of suspension, like so it'd be the kind of behaviours which wouldn't be addressed through training or things like that. So I think inherently it would be a bit more about the behaviours where it would be a kind of where it would be useful for other places to know if someone moved and then tried to get to another council, and particularly if there's a independent where there wouldn't necessarily be known within a party structure, because that would be another way. Basically, people could be kind of going from one place to another and have there not be anyone who knows, and there'd be that disconnect. So I think this would help avoid that disconnect.
So any more views about question 12? Apart from my view, which I think on the whole the case is made out that we want to change it from no to yes. Right, Councillor Whitehead's actually agreeing to that as well. Does anybody not want to change it? Okay, well that's a definite then. Okay, right. Who's got the next debating point about a different question? Councillor Rowe.
Shall we do it question by question? Because I've got question 11, question 27, question 40. But question 11 to start, which like I know we've talked about a lot already. I think the bit about it being, the onus being on the individual to kind of promote if they've been found not guilty, that could be an issue where if they've kind of if they've disengaged with social media, for example, then they might not have the same opportunity to kind of help clear their name as the council would have. So I think that like it's good. It would be good to kind of only do it where the councillor wants it to be done, but I think we'd also need to make sure we can support the councillor, as they might, if they have to do it off their own back, that might not be supporting them very well.
Do officers want to try and frame some words to add to that response? Was that one of the ones where you were offering to try and...
I'll find a form of words that describe, bearing in mind this is a consultation response, this is not our own handling procedure, this is about the consultation response itself. I'll find some words to put in the text box to explain the position that councillors found themselves in, whereby they perceive that there is some value and benefit to publishing, both publishing following the outcome of an investigation, whether that demonstrates wrongdoing or it demonstrates there is no wrongdoing, and that it should be considered the extent to which that is made available on the website versus being more proactively put out into the public domain through social media or other channels.
I mean, curiously, the question actually says an annual list, but actually, I think very much the focus of the discussion in questions and now is much more on individual circumstance and individual case, isn't it? Not an annual list. Okay, good. Right, other questions that people want to argue and change the response? Anybody else? Anything else? How are we doing? It's all gone quiet. Councillor Rowe's got one.
So, back to question 27, and I do feel that if there is a serious enough allegation that we need, so there might be times to kind of keep other councillors and officers and other stakeholders safety and stuff, there might be points where we need to kind of, while the investigation is going on, to impose a premises ban. So I think that should change to a yes in specific circumstances, but this consultation isn't that nuanced, but just a flat no, I don't think covers the sort of situations which this consultation is particularly focused on, because as been said, the sanctions which are about training and stuff and lower level stuff isn't really where this consultation is focused.
Right, any more? Yes, of course.
Tom, this is a public consultation. There's no guarantee any of this is going to be put into place. But say something is published, would a local employer, as a council, we're talking about an employer, because it relates to officers as well as members, would they not have some independent jurisdiction over any incident that had happened? I mean, it's taken away. If we're going to have a blanket, detailed requirement across the country, I'm not sure that I would like to see that. I would like to see local authorities exercise judgment, on individual cases. So if the government's wanting our views, are they going to then give us a very that's bad, to give us a detailed list of do's and don'ts, isn't it, as a government?
Yes. My view is if the government provide a power to local authorities to impose premises and facilities bans, which is what this question is about, then they will almost inevitably provide some guidance around what that would revolve around, but it would be for the district council itself, through its own measures, to determine what which particular circumstances required a premises and facilities ban.
Thank you. Right, any other questions, answers that, yes, Councillor Marriott.
Sorry, just to go back on question 26, I personally think it should stay as it is. No interim suspension would be not necessary, because it's, again, as was said before, innocent until proven guilty. If it's just if it's still being investigated, it shouldn't be until a conclusion has been reached that someone should be suspended. That's my view.
Right. Anyone else got a particular view about question 26? Response to that? Does anybody else want to support Councillor Marriott's point there? Seemingly not. So please submit your personal response to the government appropriately. Right, any more questions that we want to address and guide our council response? And Councillor Rose got one.
So yeah, question 40, I think we should...
Which one?
Question 40, the last
14.
question.
Right.
40.
Yeah. 40, right.
And I think it should be changed to it would benefit individuals with protected characteristics because of how the Equality Act is set up with kind of being able to then support people against things like harassment and stuff.
Right. Anybody else got a view about changing question 40? I think I do get the point slightly. Are you has you got a particular response to not changing it?
I don't have a strong view on this one particularly at all. I would be content to, if there's a perception that it would benefit those with protected characteristics, then I'm happy to say it would benefit individuals with protected characteristics.
Well, I think I'd support that change. Are other members comfortable enough with changing it? Yes, they are. Okay. Right. Oh, sorry, Councillor Baker.
Hi, sorry, just trying to catch up. Going back to question 26 and 27, was the request from Councillor Marriott and Rowe for 26 to change it to a yes, and on question 27 to change it to a yes? Because I thought that's what you're asking, and if that's the case, I did actually agree with Councillor Marriott and Councillor Rowe. Is that correct?
So it was the question 27, yes. I didn't I wasn't sure about the suspension because that's like a whole another level of stuff. It was like the practicality of being able to create, like if there was an issue with someone being in specific spaces, then that then I think we'd need to deal with that. I'm not sure whether the suspending, which in question 26 would add further protection, further kind of practical protections that would be needed before the outcome of an investigation, if that makes sense. So I'm kind of happy with no at the moment with what scenarios I'm thinking of for question 26, so keeping it as it is, but I'd change it to yes for question 27.
Yes.
Just by way of clarification, 27 inherently flows from 26. So 26 asks, do you think the power to suspend councillors on an interim basis pending the outcome of an investigation would be appropriate? So if you say no to that, then question 27 asks, do you agree that local authorities should have the power to impose premises and facilities bans on councillors who are suspended on an interim basis? So if you have said that you don't think the council should have the power to suspend on an interim basis, you can't then say that the council should
indeed
provide a facilities and premises ban to those who are suspended on an interim basis, because you in 27 you would then be essentially saying that the council should have the power to suspend on an interim basis, because otherwise it wouldn't be able to exclude from premises.
Yeah, you can't say no to the the first one and yes to the second one. That's essentially the point. Yeah. You want to come back on that?
Yep, okay, yep. I kind of slightly missed a couple of words in 27, so I'd have to say yes to both because I feel there would be circumstances where we would need to have control over our spaces and to kind of potentially protect staff, public, other councillors, and in the level of conduct that this is aiming to tackle, like it would be a very extreme case, but I think it does need to be an option, and we'd expect to be able to use that option for anyone else in the organisation. And I don't feel comfortable that councillors would be exempt from that as being a workplace.
I've got Councillor Hurren agreeing with that point. Councillor
I'm not happy with that. I mean, I think there's more of a case perhaps for people not retaining access to council premises, but on the other hand, as it's saying, it's just for a sort of absolute yes or no question. You know, should they be innocent and then they're not allowed access? I think it's wrong. So I would say no for both of those questions.
Might have to have a vote if we're not careful. Councillor Whitehead.
Yeah, I mean, the suspension of an innocent person might sound not very much in the whole scheme of things, but when you think back to the previous council, when it was balanced 17-all, then a malicious complaint could actually get someone suspended and change the political balance of the whole council.
Yeah, difficult one. I've got Councillor Registers going to join.
I think people are putting too much emphasis on question 26. It's the power to suspend on an interim basis. It doesn't mean it's used for every case.
No, not at all.
So that means if a case is sufficiently serious, yes, suspend them on an interim basis. Does that mean they get no access to premises and facilities? If it's sufficiently serious, yes. I mean, I don't see a compromise, a problem with saying yes to both. You could say no to both easily, but what happens when you get a case that's really serious and you can't, and that person's still coming into council meetings and still causing problems until they get fully suspended?
Who does? Oh, right, something. Yes, again.
Can I just clarify, if it would be helpful, I think it might make sense to work through from question 18 down, because we're talking about the power to suspend. Question 18, the councils are saying yes, that the power to suspend should exist. You then move on to question 19. Is it appropriate for a standards committee to have that power, or should it be some form of independent body? Your officers are suggesting that that is a role that the standards committee should be able to fulfil. Question 20. Where it is deemed that suspension is appropriate, should local authorities be required to nominate an alternative point of contact for constituents? So if a councillor is going to be suspended, then should there be some means for their residents to still have recourse into the council? And the council is saying yes, it should. Question 21. If the government reintroduced the power of suspension, do you think there should be a maximum length of suspension? Your officers have said yes to the notion of 6 months for that suspension. Any of these you can put your own individual responses in, but I'm sort of getting nods as I'm working through that these are responses. Question 22 then, how frequently do you consider councils would likely to make use of it? And your officers perceive that would be infrequent. Then we start to get into the number things. So question 23, should local authorities have the power to withhold allowances from suspended councillors? So that is somebody has been investigated and they are found to have breached, and they are found to have breached with such severity that they are going to be suspended. And we're then saying, yes, the option to withhold allowances should exist there. And then moving on to question 24, again, if somebody has been found guilty of a breach, then is it right, and they are then suspended, is it right that they are then banned from facilities and premises? And your officers are saying yes. And I'm getting quite a lot of nods, I think, as we go through. Question 25, could you withhold members' allowances and implement premises bans as sanctions in their own right? And this is where I think we've seen a little bit of then the subsequent questions. So, in essence, your officers are saying that a sanction in its own right, independent of suspension, for example, so independently of anything else, could you seek to withhold member allowances and or implement premises and facilities bans? And your officers have said yes. So if there is an issue that is so serious that you think that a particular councillor needs to be banned from the premises, needs to not have their computer, your officers are suggesting yes, that would be a good idea. We then get into the questions that rely on each other. So do you think the power to suspend councillors on an interim basis, so this is prior to having been found guilty, this is whilst somebody is under investigation, do you think that they should be suspended whilst they are undertaking investigation? And that's your question 26, is not councillor is guilty of a heinous breach of the code and is therefore suspended. It's councillor has been accused of a breach of the code, which I think goes to Councillor Whitehead's point, and the current political balance of this council or any of our town and parishes. If they are on 17 all, for example, and you've got a budget meeting coming up, and one particular party decides that they are going to skew that by making an accusation, and a councillor is suspended prior to having been found guilty of having breached the code, they would not then be able to vote in that committee meeting, and that could, I suppose part of this is understanding them, that could raise the concern that the political balance of the council has been affected by something where somebody hasn't actually been proven to have done wrong or not. So you could see a budget fall, and then 2 months later you could have a councillor declared innocent of any breach of the code, but you'd then have had an alternative budget approved, for example, because your political balance was so tight. Now, we're not currently in that scenario, but you could be. You have been in the past. And so it is something that I think, and that's what that one is about. It's about suspension ahead of having been investigated. And then 27, likewise, is about suspension on an interim basis prior to having been found to have breached the code, and if they are suspended prior to having been found to have breached the code, should you also have the power to then ban them from facilities and such like? And then it runs on. So question 28, we get into how long a period interim suspension should be. Now, because your officers suggested that there shouldn't be an interim suspension, we've said no in terms of imposing any period of time they deem fit. Now, if you perceive that there should be interim suspensions while investigations happen, then we need to give some further thought to question 28, for example, and question 29, and question 30, and on.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's very helpful, and I note that nobody has actually quarrelled with the answers that are suggested for that first string of questions. So I think that does take us to that point quite nicely. Councillor Baker.
Yeah, I was following that through until we got to 26, 27 and thought, hang on a minute, we've now gone full circle. So actually, if we look at 26 and 27, personally I feel that they should both be a yes. I understand the point that Councillor Whitehead was saying about this, and I think that's where it takes us back up to question, where's the one? 19, about do you think that it's appropriate for a standards committee to have the power, or should you, at the moment it's saying yes. If it was no, a decision to suspend should be referred to an independent body, you then remove the political aspect. Does that make sense? or not?
Sorry, I think question 19 isn't about prior to investigation. So question 19 is if you've been found guilty of a breach of the code, then you would have the power to suspend. When you get to question 26, it's about whether you have the power to suspend during the course of the investigation, and that's where it's different.
And that would that be down to officers or the standards committee?
Standards committee.
Yeah.
But well, no. Sorry, it would preempt, because it wouldn't be the standards. It would be prior to the investigation having been undertaken. So it would inevitably have to be officers who would then be making a call as to whether the issue being investigated is sufficiently serious to warrant suspension, but it would be prior to any consideration of guilt or wrongdoing.
And with the help of the independent person at the early stage as well, as you said, triaging at the beginning. Thank you. Well, are we going to try and decide?
I have not heard
on
consensus.
26 and 27.
I have not heard consensus on 26 and 27, but you may get to that point if you debate further.
Yeah, well, I've now got three pairs of hands up. Right. Let's hear from Councillor Register first then.
So following Tom's logic, if we say yes to 26 and 27, that we run the risk, that would run the risk. We don't run the risk because we don't even know this code of conduct is going to actually exist or what it says. But it runs the risk of political influence in terms of people making serious allegations against councillors to stop them voting, which we know, as we've seen people suggest that happen. Certainly not at Baber, but certainly at Town Council I have. And I think that's dangerous. And that leaves us with a problem, because you want an interim suspension option, but not. It's got to be a high bar to achieve that. Yeah, very high bar. Yeah.
Who was? I think probably it was Councillor Marriott was next there.
Well, I think all these further options are available when it comes to the Standards Committee. You know, including, as Councillor Horan said, training is the soft option. You know, and I think it should be as has been. It should go that way. And I think I take all the points about political influence, and I'm not dissuaded from my original opinion.
Councillor Rowe.
I think the example, well, okay, I've got a bit of, for question 25, the facilities bans, presumably that's the end of the process in that instance, whereas 27 would be the interim thing. And the example I'm thinking of is where it's really obvious someone isn't innocent, because there might be CCTV, there might be plenty of witnesses and stuff, but because the investigation hasn't been completed and there hasn't been a decision on what is the proportionate sanctions to give and what is right. So there's and as Councillor Register said, it would be a very high bar, but it's kind of that grey area of, because people won't have been found innocent or guilty, or what standards to be, but we may know, and officers may know, that there has been a serious breach. So it's not aimed at people who aren't guilty, it's more aimed at people who it would be 100% certain that there'd be a breach, but the investigation hasn't been completed yet, so the what proportionate response and the official outcome of the investigation hasn't been completed, and it would be in the very, 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 very exceptional circumstances where there would be there may well be a need for, let's say, for people's safety to put things in place before all that process has taken place. So if there is, so for example, I suppose if there is a, say there is a massive punch up and there is a officer there who can go, actually this is a clear breach of kind of, let's say, assault, and you need to leave the premises. Kind of, I don't know what process we have at the moment, whereas this would help us be able to do that. Does that make sense?
It's very difficult to create that very high bar and define it, isn't it?
If I can be of help, I'm not sure that creating various hypothetical examples of what may or may not is necessarily going to help you in this instance, because ultimately there's a question. It's a pretty limited question. It's not whys and wherefores and all the rest of it. So I think you either come to a view that there might be some circumstances where it is the right thing to do and therefore that power should exist, or you come to the view that it is inherently politically dangerous to allow that to happen because of the potential for people to make false allegations in order to skew a political situation, and therefore you say, actually, no, we don't think that's the right thing to do. So I think you make a call one way or the other. I'm looking at the room, I'm sensing there are two quite strongly held divergent views on this. And so I think as monitoring officer, I will probably have to take a view, because this committee is providing a steer, but on this particular question, I'm not getting a clear steer, because of pretty much I'm getting about 3 and 3 saying, well, yes, and 3 saying, well, no, probably not. So
no, I mean, there is question 26 has actually got a free box to outline in more detail, but yeah, the basic answer remains that we're not clearly in favour of the power being there, or we're not clearly in favour of the power not being there, so it's not very difficult. Councillor Hurren, can you take us out of the morass of difficulty?
Well, I would like to think so. Bearing in mind it's going to be a very high bar anyway, I think most people who were under investigation at a time would probably want to take themselves out of the arena anyway as a relief measure for themselves. And providing the opinion came quick, I would still slightly favour yes on both of them, because if they are under investigation, I think it sends a clearer signal if they're out of the arena, really. So I would be consistent on yes for the protection of the person if he was innocent, and maybe if it's that heated. We're talking about very extreme circumstances that could hardly ever happen, but I think for safety and for a fair judgment to be made, they probably shouldn't be in the room while the investigation is going on. And that would be my personal view, but happy if I'm overruled, then fine, I won't complain.
Well, shall I propose? We've got to move on and reach a decision about this. Shall I propose that we change the two answers from no to yes, and make a very strong statement at the bottom of question 26 about how exceptional the circumstances and how high the bar, etc., should be set. I'm conscious that although this is only a government consultation, effectively we are thinking about and informing how we would want to use it in the future, really. I think most of our thinking is in that place, really. We're not thinking about some hypothetical council far away. We're thinking, what it would be like here. So that's my proposal. If anyone wants to support that proposal, Is this a seconding or not?
I have an alternative proposal, which is we put any other further comments on section 26, and we say, question 26, and we say, yes, but only under extreme circumstances, or something of that ilk.
Well, I think that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
We
but
make a
then,
strong statement.
Sorry, question 27, we put unsure, because we're unsure, aren't we? Sorry, does that make sense? We are unsure because we don't know whether it should apply, take all the rights away from the councillor, because it could cause, that would prevent the political influence from actually working, wouldn't it?
Right, does anybody want to support my proposal?
No, I just want to make a comment.
Nobody, okay.
Tom
right.
is doing this as a council officer. He's replying. I think if you feel that strongly, then you make sure that you make your own personal comments on this paper, because I don't think we're going to come to an agreement for everybody.
Yeah, we did say at the outset that option was available, so perhaps that's the best thing we can do.
Tom responds as he feels as the monitoring officer, and he's inexperienced. We've got councillors here that have not been councillors very long and have not experienced some of the politicking that goes on, especially around allegations. So I think Tom does what he thinks is right, and if you feel that strongly, we'll send your own personal comments in. Thank you.
Can you work with that? Yes. Is it, you want to say, no, you're right?
It was just a comment, really. I would like to take it to a vote, personally. I've been investigating officer for many years in a local authority, and I've seen lots of the strings of this and all sorts of scenarios that you're sort of suggesting. If it's a yes to 26 and 27, it would be at the beginning of the investigation process, in which case the officers would make the interim suspension if they felt it was necessary. And if the person who was being suspended felt it was a political, we've taken the councillors out of the issue there, if they felt there was a political steer from an officer, they've always got the complaints process. They can always go through the complaints process and say, do you know what, we think we've got bias going on within the officers and I'm not happy with that. So there are lots of levels of prevention there. I just feel that, perhaps we could have a vote on it, on those particular questions, because either we're leaving it all to these guys to do the thing as they see fit and we'll put our own in, which is great, or we are being asked to amend what will come to a consensus on the questions.
All right, well, let's see. That's the proposal, is that we change them to yes with a strong statement proposed by the chair and seconded by Councillor Baker. Who's in favour of that? 1, 2, 3, 4. And who's against that? 1, 2, 3, 4. I think that takes us back to the point of saying that the committee is not of a view that it wants to direct the answer to that one.
That's fine. I can absolutely continue to progress the consultation response. And
yes. Right. Are there any other questions that people want to change the answer? Are we all right up to the end apart from that? Oh, that's a relief indeed. Right. Let's get back to where on earth we are at the beginning of this lot. I've lost myself now. Is there a can't find any recommendation. Hang on, must be there somewhere. Or is it just a question that we have provided the guidance that we provided? What have we got? Oh, well done. Thank you. Committee Services comes to the rescue. Right. So we are endorsing the Chief Operating Officer's proposed responses to this consultation and provided a steer, which we have on the bits that we can't agree about. And we've encouraged members to submit their own responses, which will be taking place but through reminding them shortly through an email to everybody accordingly. So is everybody okay with that recommendation as it stands now? Not quite.
So does this mean that question 12 that we spoke about earlier to agree to change, we're not going to do that? We're going to leave it as it is?
Do we need to do that? Get a proposal
If it helps,
on that?
I think you're looking to amend your recommendation 2.1 so that it says that the Joint Audit and Standards Committee endorse the Chief Operating Officer's proposed response to the Standards Consultation (bracket Appendix A close bracket) subject to amendments suggested by the committee. So question 12 was quite clear, and I'm perfectly happy to change that one. Just by way of clarification and confirmation, what I have noted, question 1 needs to be changed. Question 11 was to create some free text that explains about publishing outcomes of investigations, including where there has been no wrongdoing, and then provide some narrative about the extent to which that publication is proactively promoted or something along those lines, in dialogue with the person who's been complained about. Question 12 was a straightforward change to a yes. Question 26 and 27 I need to give some thought to and reflect the fact that we've got divergent views within the committee. I'm erring towards Councillor Register's suggestion of something in the free text for 26 and an unsure for 27, but I just need to reflect on that. And then question 40 is going to change to a yes, it would benefit individuals with protected characteristics.
Right, so the proposal has been changed slightly to take account of the fact that we are changing a few of them. Is that all right with everybody now? Good. Move to a vote.
We still need to propose and second for that vote.
Sorry?
We still need to propose and second the vote.
Oh yes, you need a moment to change the wording.
We need to propose and second it.
Oh, sorry, no one seconded it yet. Councillor Register's seconded it. Oh, well, I'm proposing it and Councillor Register's seconding it. Done. Right. Sorry about that. Oh. Got to get back to the process.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now in progress.
Right. Done.
Thank you, Chair. That's 8 votes for. That's unanimous.
Right, thank you. Well, I think looking at the time, I think we're going to have to need another little comfort break before we press on to the end. Sorry to keep you back so long, officers. Must just have 5 minutes tops. Welcome back to the Audit and Standards Committee meeting. We're going on to the half-year complaints and monitoring report, which is JAC 24/28. I'd like to invite the Deputy Monitoring Officer to introduce the report to the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Members, this report provides details on the number of Code of Conduct complaints received between the 1st of May 2024 and the 1st of January 2025. As a quick overview, 29 complaints have been received within this time frame. This is a significant increase in complaints in comparison to the same time period in 2023, which saw 18 complaints received. Overall, 25 of these complaints were determined, with 4 complaints still ongoing at the time of writing this report. I can confirm that these complaints are still outstanding at this moment in time and are currently all with our independent person for further review. Breaking the figures down into district specifics, BABA still generates a significant amount of Code of Conduct complaints. 15 Code of Conduct complaints have been received within the time frame. However, ultimately only 1 of these complaints were upheld, with the subject member being instructed to undergo further training in relation to declaring interests. Parish councillors make up 14 out of 15 of these complaints within BABA, which have come in from across a total of 7 different parish councils. Mid-Suffolk has seen a significant rise in complaints over this 6-month period, which is a divergence away from this district typically generating very few complaints. Overall, 14 complaints have been submitted during this time frame, which has been a rise from 5 in comparison to the same time period in 2023. Of these 14 complaints, 4 resulted in a finding of a breach of the Code of Conduct. These 4 complaints related to 2 councillors, with each councillor having 2 complaints upheld against them. 1 subject member was instructed to apologise to the complainants via email, and the other subject member was instructed to undertake intensive training on the Code of Conduct, data protection and safeguarding. Parish councils are largely responsible for the increase of complaints within Mid-Suffolk. 11 complaints in total were regarding the conduct of our parish councillors, with just 1 parish council in particular generating 10 out of these 11 complaints. In terms of complaints about district councillors, 4 were received in total. During this time period, no district councillors have been found in breach of a Code of Conduct. The Monitoring Office still receives a considerable amount of queries about procedural and governance issues, particularly from parish and town councils. The volume of these queries has increased within this 6-month period, which reflects ongoing issues already demonstrated. Some of these problems are submitted as formal Code of Conduct complaints, which has resulted in an increase in the amount of complaints being determined as the code not being engaged. However, despite this, we are still meeting our timeframes for dealing with complaints. On average, it takes the Monitoring Office 30 working days to fully investigate Code of Conduct complaints, which falls in line with a 50-day guideline currently outlined in our handling procedure. As an addition to the standard complaints report, members are asked to formally approve a refreshed Code of Conduct complaints handling procedure as attached in Appendix A. This new handling procedure incorporates the changes as recommended by this committee back in July 2024, as well as providing a general refresh and restructure to the document in order to improve its accessibility to the public. Members of this committee also requested that the Monitoring Officer reviews the use of self-referral complaints and brings a determination as to whether this should be fully incorporated into the Council's handling procedure going forward. After much consideration, it has been decided that self-referrals will not be formally accepted at this time. This office receives a significant amount of Code of Conduct complaints on an annual basis. Whilst recognising the potential merit for this style of complaints, the introduction of self-referred complaints means councillors may use the system to raise further non-Code of Conduct related issues, minor breaches which wouldn't otherwise be investigated, or simply to get ahead of complaints before one is submitted by another individual. The role of a monitoring office within this context is to deal with Code of Conduct complaints. It is not to replace the role of the courts in matters of defamation or resolving other tensions. It is important to note that the monitoring office does already accept elements of self-referrals, but not in the formal sense that we have been asked to review and bring to this committee today. The introduction of a formal self-referral complaint process would have to be established with its own independent handling procedure, as the current handling procedure for complaints is currently inappropriate for this type. We ask that the committee notes this decision, and myself and Tom are both happy to answer any questions on this, the new handling procedure, or any of the complaints data of the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right, members, have we any questions on that, for the officer, on what she has said? Councillor McLaren.
Thank you, Chair. I would find it helpful, and I don't know whether my colleagues would, whether we could see the sort of complaints that I can't get my head around what complaints might consist of. Thank you.
Of course, thank you, Councillor. So, as an overview, if I look at the type of complaints that we've received within this time period, a majority of them deal with respect, usually respect for other councillors at the district or the parish council or for members of the public. So that makes a considerable amount of our complaints. A lot of our complaints also fall under the bullying, harassment and discrimination part of the code as well. Those are our two main complaint types that we have in, if that is helpful.
Is that helpful? Yeah. Any other questions, members? No other questions. Right. Is there any way in which we can debate this? I mean, they are mainly facts. What we've been asked to actually agree is that we note the information and that we approve the refreshed but not dramatically changed complaints handling procedure, which as you've heard, was changed after the difficulties that we discussed back in July, and also that the monitoring officer's decision not to accept self-referral complaints be noted. So does anybody want to debate those three recommendations in any way at all? No? We don't? Yes, we do.
Well, I just want to make a comment, really. I'm surprised at the amount of parish council complaints. I wondered if anybody had a view on that, really.
I think I'd comment on that there are, give or take, nearly 200 parish councils that are covered by this report. So it's not surprising that they get a few complaints. But yes. So we have no further questions. Yes, Councillor Wyatt's going to have a question. I'll debate. We're on to debate now, actually.
A bit of both. I mean, I'm just a bit perplexed why a half-year report should have 8 months worth of data in. What's driven this? We normally have a half-year report, don't we, or a three-quarter. This is a half-year report, but it's got 8 months of data in.
Is it? I thought about that. 1st of May, 1st of January. Yes. Well. Yeah. Have we got any particular comment from officers about that? We're not covering a precise half year on this interim report.
So the time periods are mainly used just to keep the data as up to date as possible when this report eventually comes to committee. So this was written a couple of weeks ago. This is already a little bit outdated because we've had complaints come in since. And then I think our annual report is reviewed in June, July time. So that then encompasses another 6 or 7 months. So I appreciate there's some overlap. But this is just to make sure that the data is as up to date as possible when taking it to this committee. Thank you.
I suppose in terms of comparatives, it would be perhaps helpful if we did a full year's report that actually matched the municipal year, possibly. Is that a thought?
Of course, yeah, we can make sure that the annual report that comes later on in this year reflects the municipal year dates.
Sort of we did that in sort of June or something for the 24th, 25 year.
Yeah, we'll make sure that that's all in hand next year.
Right, if nobody else has got any issues to raise with that, then I think we can move to a vote. Someone like to propose the recommendations as written? Councillor McLaren would. Councillor Register would second. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now in progress.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. That's 7 votes for. That's unanimous.
Thank you. And finally then, we go to the forward plan. And with apologies and notes that we've finished up having to have extra meetings to fit in with the auditors and so forth. I don't think there's anything else we need to say about this this forward plan, but I have asked the officers, that's all the officers, that we receive on the 24th of February, our next meeting, a list right the way through the 25-26 year, furnished with at least the things that we can anticipate, even perhaps not the ones we can't, but yes, so that's just for noting. I don't think we need to have a vote on that one. So I therefore declare the meeting closed, and we'll see you all again on the 24th of February.